You know that feeling, right? When things just fall apart at work. Like
Hmm.
one minute everything's fine, the next you get hit with a surprise pay cut or, wow, even a dismissal. It feels like it comes out of nowhere.
Absolutely. And if you felt that,
Yeah.
you are definitely not alone. It happens a lot.
Yeah, I think we've all been there just scratching our heads like, what just happened? What did
Mhm.
I miss?
And that first reaction is usually, oh, just bad luck, right?
Totally.
But today, we're diving into something, well, deeper. This idea that maybe these things, these negative events, they aren't always so random. There might be hidden systems, patterns underneath it all.
Exactly. We're digging into the source in Unbreakable Life Fund Chapter 1.pdf to really try and understand those underlying forces.
Hmm.
And for you listening, think of this as like a shortcut, a way to get a quicker handle on what might really be going on so you can navigate things maybe a bit better, feel more resilient.
Build that awareness.
Yeah. I remember years ago there's this restructuring, quote unquote, and I felt completely blindsided, just totally random, wrong place, wrong time.
That feeling is so common, it's powerful. We naturally look for simple answers, and, well, bad luck is simple.
It is.
But the author we're looking at today really makes a case that in our professional lives, misfortune is rarely just random and believing it's pure chance. Well, that can actually stop us seeing what's really going on.
How so?
It prevents us from looking at the dynamics, the power plays, the things that might help us avoid it next time.
Okay. So let's get into that core idea then, this illusion of randomness. The book gives these examples, right? The unexpected pay cut, the dismissal, even with good performance.
Yes, strong examples.
And it's so easy to just think, well, that's just how it is sometimes. But the author's saying, no, look closer.
Exactly. They say it with real certainty. These things rarely happen without some kind of underlying reason. They even share their own story, getting a pay cut despite actually exceeding revenue targets.
Wow. How does that even happen?
Well, the official reason might be tied to numbers, but the real reason, that was about shifting power dynamics inside the organization, changes in who held influence.
Ah, okay.
And what's fascinating, and maybe a bit scary, is that even if your objective results look great, these hidden forces, these power structures, can just override them.
So it's not always about fairness or just doing a good job.
That seems to be the point.
Yeah.
You control your performance, sure, but you don't necessarily control how that performance is valued by the people with power. Understanding that difference
Yeah.
is, well, it's crucial.
That's a definite aha moment right there. We really want to believe in meritocracy, don't we? Like, work hard, do well, get
I
rewarded.
do. It's deeply ingrained.
But this suggests there's this whole other layer we need to tune into, the political landscape, sort of.
Precisely. And it's human nature to kind of prefer the bad luck narrative, maybe because it feels less threatening
Mhm.
than admitting we don't fully grasp all the forces at play.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But, as the author points out, sticking to bad luck means we don't learn. We don't see the real roots of the issue, and we might just walk into the same trap again.
So what's the alternative?
It's about developing a discipline almost. Learning to observe what others might overlook. Reading the currents of power, asking who really benefits from a decision, tracing back the cause of disruptions.
Okay, that leads nicely into this next bit about performance not always being the shield we think it is. The source talks about beyond the numbers, why results alone don't guarantee recognition. That really hits home for a lot of people, I bet.
Oh, absolutely. That belief that merit equals reward is so common. The author thought that too initially. They expected exceeding sales targets would mean, positive recognition. Obvious, right?
Yeah, standard expectation.
But then they get a salary reduction despite those great results. It just completely flips the script on that meritocracy idea.
Right. So if hitting the targets isn't the whole story, what else is going on? What are these other factors?
This is where that hidden landscape, the organizational politics, really comes into view. It's not always just about the metrics. Things like who hired you? Who are you connected to internally? How does the leadership perceive you?
Perception.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, those factors can sometimes carry more weight than your actual performance data. And here's a really counterintuitive idea. Sometimes being a really high performer can actually make you a target.
Wait, how? Doing too well is bad.
It can be, weirdly enough. Maybe your success makes others look bad, or it disrupts the existing power balance, or maybe it just makes someone uncomfortable. It's not straightforward.
That's unsettling if you're someone who just focuses on getting the job done well.
It is.
Yeah.
And it helps explain why sometimes the reasons given for a demotion or a transfer or a pay cut feel so vague. So unsatisfying.
You never get a straight answer.
Because the real reasons, like maybe you don't fit with a new leader's plan or you've become what they call a strategic liability
Mm.
because of some internal shift, those often go unsaid.
Strategic liability. That sounds ominous.
It just means your presence or even your past success somehow gets in the way of where things are headed now, or maybe threatens someone else's position. So yeah, performance matters, obviously, but being turned in to those power shifts, the leadership undercurrents, that's vital for survival, it seems.
Okay, this gets even heavier, though. The next section is when results become a threat, the structure that pushes high performers out. The idea that your success could actively lead to you being pushed out, that's quite something.
It really is jarring. The author shares this incredibly vivid story from a multinational company. They didn't just meet targets, they blew past them. Significant.
And the reward was...
Getting removed from their position,
Yeah,
offered a lower salary, and being told, oh, by the way, we've already picked your replacement.
with no clear reason why.
Exactly. No clear rationale given. It highlights this huge disconnect that can happen between what an individual achieves and what the organization, or maybe certain people within it, actually wants or needs at that moment.
It's like your success itself became inconvenient.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, inconvenient. Exceptional performance can upset the internal balance. Maybe it shines too bright a light on others who aren't doing as well. Maybe your influence grows, and that's seen as a challenge to the established order.
So you become a problem just by doing your job well.
It can happen.
Huh.
And the author also talks about the psychological side of this ambiguity, starting to get fewer meeting invites, less access to information, your job title gets a bit fuzzy, these subtle signs that you're being sidelined.
That really messes with your head, I imagine. It contradicts everything we're usually told about career progression. Perform well, move up.
Right, so when the opposite happens, it's incredibly confusing. You feel isolated, like you fundamentally misunderstand how things work.
Yeah, you start questioning yourself.
And that isolation. It can be worse because, let's be honest, some managers might actually see a star performer on their team as a threat to their own position. It happens. So instead of championing your success, they might subtly downplay it. And the really insidious part is how getting pushed out, even when you've performed well, often gets framed as your failure. It masks what's really going on systemically.
Okay, there's a phrase in the book that really jumped out. I can't protect you anymore. That sounds like such a loaded statement.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Oh, please.
Especially coming after strong performance with no warnings. Hearing that, it carries a ton of weight.
What does it really signal, do you think?
It basically signals that the decision to remove you has likely already been made, probably higher up. And there's so much pressure coming down that even your direct manager feels powerless to stop it. They can no longer shield you.
Wow. The word protect sounds supportive at first, but here it means it's already over.
Pretty much. It implies the wheels are already in motion,
Yeah.
and they're just letting you know they can't intervene. Organizations love their euphemisms for firing someone, strategic realignment, restructuring.
Ben.
Right. But a stark phrase like, I can't protect you anymore, for someone paying attention to the dynamics, it cuts right through that corporate speak. It tells you the score.
It also makes you wonder, well, who does get protected then? And why? Because it's clearly not just about doing a good job.
Exactly. Who gets protected often comes down to influence, their position in the hierarchy, maybe their relationship with key players, or just how convenient it is for those in power to keep them around. It's about maintaining the status quo for the people at the top.
So it's not always fair.
Often not. And critically, hearing that phrase, it can also be a kind of warning, a signal that maybe it's time to think about leaving on your own terms, to protect your own dignity and professional well-being.
Right. Okay, so sometimes it's direct like that, but the book also talks about less direct methods. This idea of encouraged resignations sounds a bit manipulative.
It can definitely feel that way. It's essentially a way for companies to get someone to leave without actually firing them. It's cleaner for them, legally safer.
How does that work in practice?
Well, the author describes it as a process. The message, often delivered politely, subtly, gets clearer over time. You don't really have a future here. They might tell you your position's already been filled or offer you really undesirable choices like a big pay cut or a dead-end role.
Ugh. So they make staying seem impossible or just really unpleasant?
Exactly.
Right.
It's like diplomatic pressure, calm language, but the underlying message is things will likely get worse if you stick around. The goal is to make you feel like resigning is the only logical choice.
So it looks like you left voluntarily.
Precisely. Which lets the company off the hook. The author's story of getting help from a labor union and negotiating a settlement instead of just quitting, that really highlights how important it is to see this pressure for what it is.
And not just blame yourself.
Absolutely. Don't internalize it. Recognize it might be an engineered situation.
But then things can get even darker, right? The book mentions abuse by email. That sounds like it goes beyond maneuvering into something much worse.
It does. This was a direct, threatening email from a manager. A clear-cut abuse of power.
And what happened? Did HR step in?
Well, according to the author, the response from HR was pretty lukewarm. Inadequate, really. It seemed more about protecting the company's image than dealing with the abuse or protecting the employee.
That's incredibly disillusioning. It suggests a really toxic environment.
Yes, where problems get buried to maintain appearances. And sometimes the person who speaks up ends up being punished, not the perpetrator.
So what did the author do?
They resisted, documented everything, but ultimately the choice they were given was basically stay in this toxic situation with no consequences for the abuser or leave. They chose to leave to preserve their dignity.
Wow. That's a stark choice.
It really is. And it's a powerful example of how messed up things can get when power corrupts the system and why sometimes leaving is the only healthy option.
Okay, so after going through all these really difficult experiences, what's the takeaway? How do you process this? The book talks about the discipline of refusing to call it bad luck.
Yeah, this is a really crucial mindset shift. It's natural, as a defense mechanism maybe, to just write off misfortune as random chance, bad luck.
It's easier that way sometimes.
It feels easier in the moment, perhaps. But the author argues that doing so stops you from actually analyzing what happened. You don't look at the power structures, the hidden agendas, the question of who actually benefited from what happened.
So accepting coincidence just shuts down the investigation, prevents learning.
Exactly that.
Wow.
It might offer temporary relief, but it stops you from seeing the patterns, the systemic issues. And if you don't see them, you're more likely to encounter them again.
Right. Makes sense.
The discipline, then, is to actively look for the structure behind the misfortune, to ask those harder questions, to develop, working theories about what's really going on under the surface.
It sounds like moving from being a passive victim of circumstance to being more of an active analyst of your environment.
That's a great way to put it. It's about building strategic awareness, even when things go wrong, so you can make more informed choices moving forward.
So the final part seems to focus on bouncing back, rebuilding, taking control after feeling betrayed by your performance, essentially.
Yes, resilience is key. The author talks about how assumptions get shattered when you realize good performance isn't always protection. When the metrics you work so hard on are maybe even used against you, repurposed as tools of control.
That's rough. So what do you do with that? Does your past work become meaningless?
Not at all. That's the crucial point. While the external validation from those numbers might disappear or betray you, the actual skills you built, the experience you gained doing the work, that's still yours. It's valuable. It's portable.
Okay, so it's about separating the achievement itself from how the organization chose to value or misuse it.
Exactly. See the numbers as evidence of your process, your capabilities, not just as proof of your value to that specific organization at that specific time.
I like that framing.
And the author's later experience, facing another forced resignation, really drove home the need for something more. Knowledge. Knowledge of workers' rights, and the power that can come from solidarity.
Which led them to a labor union.
Yeah, after an initial attempt at more informal collective action didn't work out, joining the union, understanding the formal processes for negotiation, that became a way to regain some control.
So it's about arming yourself with knowledge and maybe seeking collective support.
Yes, it highlights that taking action, even if it feels like a solitary stand at first, but doing it with knowledge of your rights and the system, that fosters a sense of agency, a feeling of control, which is incredibly important for resilience, whatever the final outcome might be.
So if we boil this all down, the big message from this deep dive, drawing on An Unbreakable Life, is really that professional misfortune. It's often not just random noise. There are usually systems, reasons, dynamics underneath it all.
That's the core takeaway, I think. And understanding that allows us to shift our perspective, to become more analytical, more observant in our own workplaces.
Yeah, less likely to be blindsided, perhaps. So for you listening, maybe take a moment, think about your own work environment. What are the power dynamics you see? Are there unspoken rules maybe influencing things?
And that leads to a final thought to maybe chew on. Now that you've heard about some of this hidden machinery, this stuff that operates behind the scenes, what's one small shift you could make in how you observe things at work? What tiny change in focus might make a big difference in your understanding and maybe even your preparedness.
Something to definitely think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope these insights give you a fresh perspective on your own professional journey.